Peter Hitchens, hello, how are you?
Oh, well, I'm not dead yet, I think I can confidently say.
Good to hear it. The state is protecting its workers, it's guaranteeing their income through the furlough scheme, preventing short-term destitution. What's not to love?
Well, first of all, the short-term destitution from which it's protecting them is caused by the actions of that self-same state. So it's no good saying, look at me, how clever I am for rescuing this person who's fallen into the sea, when you have yourself just pushed them in. And that's really what they're doing. They're claiming credit for rescuing people they have pushed into the sea. And this is the most disastrous suspension, throttling of a major economy deliberately undertaken that I've ever seen. And to then say, oh, right, well, in that case, we will spend billions of pounds we don't have on rescuing the people who can't work and can't produce, doesn't seem to me to be particularly creditable.
So I know your position is quite well tread and well publicised now, but could you just, in brief terms, outline sort of your opposition to that state-imposed lockdown?
Yes, the action of the government from the start has been disproportionate. Everybody who attacks me will always say, "Oh, you don't care about people dying." I care about people dying as much as anybody else does. I care about them dying whether it's being publicised or not. But we have had in this country on many previous occasions epidemics of one kind or another, usually during the winter, but sometimes nearly as late as this, in which quite large numbers of people have died. And there has been no fuss, anything remotely resembling what we're now undergoing. And that seems to me to be first of all, an interesting question. Why was there no fuss then? Why is there so much more fuss now? And the most striking of these previous epidemics was the Hong Kong flu of 1968-69, which killed 80,000 people in this country alone and many more around the world. But there was no shutdown of the economy. People were not forced to stay at home. And had there been, I doubt it would have made much difference. Almost all the research that's coming in suggests that the effect of these actions is not actually to be found. In fact, the one really fascinating piece of research which has come in suggests that it's actually having a negative effect. This was done in New York State by Governor Andrew Cuomo, who surveyed the people who'd actually been hospitalized in recent weeks because of COVID-19. And he found that 66% of them had been obediently staying at home. And I mean staying at home because they checked when this came in, because he was incredulous about it, because it was shocking to him. He had believed the opposite. But in fact, far from helping, it may even have intensified the spread of the disease, which suggests that we may have a wholly wrong approach in the first place. So in every way, looked at rationally, this has been a disproportionate mistake. The confinement of people to their homes is ridiculous and an assault on freedom, but which repels me, because I'm very much in favor of human beings being allowed to get on with doing what they like as much as possible, as long as they don't do harm to other people, but also the strangling of the economy of a major and advanced and wealthy country has been catastrophic. And nobody has ever done anything like this before. And the amounts of money involved lost are huge. And people think, oh, well, we can make it all up later. It's not like that. One of the basic principles of economics is the velocity, the speed at which money circulates, the speed at which it reaches you. If you don't get in a whole month or a whole 2 months, or possibly 3 months, as long as this shutdown, I think, may well last that long, the money which you were expecting, but you continue to have to spend the money you have to do on all the things you need, it makes a huge hole in your personal economy. If you do it to a country, it makes an even bigger hole. It destroys businesses. And there are so many people now who've mortgaged their houses and worked for years to build up successful small businesses, who through no fault of their own are teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, and whose businesses will probably never return to life after this is over.
We'll come to the grim economic picture momentarily, but I'd just like to explore there. You said you sort of you're an advocate for freedom as long as broadly doesn't bring harm to others.
That's right.
How does that factor in where, for instance, in the case of this pandemic, let's say someone is out, enjoying those freedoms, going to work, being in public. If they're transmitting the disease, surely they are then bringing harm to other people.
Only if people who are at risk from the disease, which is actually quite a small minority, are out as well. Instead of confining everybody to their homes, if the government issued advice saying, look, if you're over 75 and you have the following preconditions, diabetes, you're severely overweight, you have big major heart trouble, or all the other things which are linked very strongly with deaths from COVID, if you have all those things, stay inside. Unless you don't care, in which case do what you like, then it seems to me that it's not the responsibility of the person who transmits the disease, but the responsibility of the person who decided quite voluntarily he'd rather live than cower at home if he catches the disease. I myself am 68. I'm supposedly in or very near the danger zone. I would personally go out to the pub tomorrow, with a crowded pub tomorrow without any hesitation, because frankly, I think a life without risk is a life not worth living. Every day I bicycle, and under normal circumstances, this is by the standards of walking slowly down the street. It's a very dangerous thing to do because you expose yourself to fast traffic and mad drivers. But I do it because I would much rather do it than not. Any life of any worth or value involves a certain amount of risk. We should decide whether we should be able to take it. It would be perfectly sensible, I'd say, to warn those who are at risk, actually quite small minority of people who are at risk from COVID-19, to stay off the streets if they want to, and make sure that they're looked after at home. But the rest of the population should be allowed to get on with their lives. There's never been in the history of fighting disease, there's never been an attempt to quarantine the healthy before.
So, a couple of points there. Just on your point about quarantining the healthy, was that not the case during the Black Death? I think there was some level of isolation during the Black Death, wasn't there? Entire communities would go into quarantine, even if they had yet to contract the disease. But
they wouldn't go into quarantine. They'd try and keep people out who had the disease. It's different. They weren't kept in. They would bar the roads and set up guards around their towns and villages to keep people out. They weren't confined to their homes.
Sure. Okay. So
I have to say that the Black Death is a very different phenomenon from COVID-19.
Yes, absolutely. Two very different diseases.
People should really get these into perspective. Another thing which is very different from COVID-19, which has constantly been equated with it, was the so-called Spanish flu epidemic or pandemic of 1918, which killed the healthy and the young in very large numbers, which COVID-19 in general does not. It's simply not comparable. Also, the numbers of people who died in that pandemic was enormous. So the false equations being made by people trying to spread, it seems to me, fear and demoralization over these matters have been astonishing. It's not the Black Death, and it's not the 1918 pandemic either.
Yeah, that wasn't my intention. I was just
much more like large but not particularly noted flu epidemics. It's not flu, no, I know that. Flu epidemics of the past 30 or 40 years.
Yes, sorry, I wasn't comparing. I was just on your point about.
Don't immediately say, no, I am not saying it is the flu. Somebody will immediately say, oh, so you're saying it's the flu, is it? And the argument will end in moronic drivel rather than reason. So I have to put in, because there are so many imbeciles in the world, I have to put in caveats and safety devices to keep the imbeciles away from the heart of my argument.
Sure.
It's in the nature of this debate.
One place where your argument, your approach is being implemented is Sweden, where they have put that emphasis on individual responsibility. If you're at risk, please stay at home. Some people go out, some people don't. However, they have seen, compared to their geographical neighbours, a very high death rate.
It's not very high, it's high, but the reason for that is conceded by the Swedish authorities, which is that they made exactly the same stupid mistake that the United Kingdom made, which is they did not from the start protect the care homes where the most vulnerable people were. Swedish care homes are actually very large, and once the disease is in them, it goes through it very damagingly. And nobody in Sweden pretends that isn't the case. But it has no bearing at all on the spread of or the fatality of the disease among the normal population. Also, these comparisons with immediate neighbours of Sweden are obviously interesting. There are differences between them. But if you're going to compare any country with other countries on this, you have to compare it generally, not in a particular narrow way. And immediately you compare it, say, with the Republic of Ireland or with Belgium. The Republic of Ireland, the levels which is engaged in a pretty tight shutdown, The deaths per million are very comparable to those in Sweden. And if you compare it with Belgium, which has had a very tight shutdown, indeed, the deaths per million are much higher in Belgium than they are in Sweden. So the moment you start spreading out the comparison to make it a realistic comparison rather than just picking the particular examples that suit you, what you will find actually is that there is no congruence between any policy adopted by any government and any outcome. There just isn't one. The only thing which appears to exist is a general bell curve of first of all a rising and then a falling level of infections and deaths, which is quite standard among viruses. And the actions of governments don't seem to make much difference. We don't even know when it really started. And recently there was discovery in France of a definite case of COVID-19 in France that they were able to isolate as having been such, which took place in December of 2019. Now, if the virus was active in Western Europe in December 2019, then almost all the calculations on which we're basing this seem to me to be wrong.
Back to the economy, the economic downturn. I mean, in your eyes, how big a recession, depression are we facing? Initially, we were talking about since 2008. Now, it seems the comparison du jour is the biggest economic downturn for 300 years.
Economics was invented to make epidemiology look respectable. I don't think that we have really very much of a clue as to how bad it's going to be. But I think when the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who has himself launched this policy, warns that it's going to be bad, as Rishi Sunak did yesterday, I think you can be pretty sure it's going to be bad. I think if you take this much money out of an economy, if you shrink it so much, if you strangle so many active businesses, large and small, if you prevent so much vital economic activity, then you will get a major problem. I can't tell you how big it's going to be. I think there are two forms it will take. One, the form of unemployment, people both losing jobs and losing the businesses that they used to have. And secondly, in the form of very much higher taxation and raids of various sorts on the savings of the frugal who have tried to prepare for the future, but will now find that there may well even be a wealth tax, a capital levy, a raid on people's savings. That the interest rates which will be available for savings will be pushed down to a minimum so low that they're basically being shrilled away by inflation to worthlessness. And also very high taxation, both direct and indirect, which will fall equally heavily on the poor as on the rich. And in fact, probably less heavily on the rich, because the rich can employ expensive accountants and lawyers to avoid legally paying tax, which they will do, as they always do. But the poor cannot, and they have to pay them, and they will.
The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak's stock has been on a meteoric rise. I mean, do you think that support is misplaced? I think you recently compared him to a payday lender.
Well, yes, that's basically what he has been doing. And there he sits behind the window, shelling out wads of £5 and £10 notes to happy customers who go away and spend the money and then find that it isn't Rishi Sunak who comes to see them when the debt falls due. It's somebody much less charming. And what they will find is that Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, don't get me wrong, I'm sure very nice people work for them, but what they have to do is to tell people that by law they have to hand over large sums of money to the government. That's what's going to happen to all of us. There'll be an emergency budget. I would reckon probably sometime after the middle of June, when most of the major restrictions will probably be withdrawn. Sometime after the middle of June, there'll be an emergency budget, and there will be very large increases in taxation. And an awful lot of people have already undergone the other great effect of this, which is actual wage cuts, I think pretty much unheard of in this country since the 19th. So people are just going to be worse off. And they're going to be worse off at the hands of hard-faced people who say, you can't have this money, or we've got to take this money from you. And nice, smiling Rishi Sunak will be absent on these occasions. He won't be there. Just as the payday loans people who happily gave you the money aren't the ones, as I say, who come after you when they want it back. And they will want it back because it is a loan.
How powerful do you think the concept of emergency is in our nation? It's something that we invoke from time to time, in this instance, as an emergency budget.
Well, this is going to be a huge problem over the next 5 years. Huge numbers of things are going to be done in this country on the pretext that we are in a very severe economic emergency and therefore it has to be done. And for instance, if you care about this, which I do, the planning regulations are all going to go on the bonfire. So whenever everybody wants to build something large and ugly on the greenbelt, then anyone who opposes it will be told, no, you can't oppose it because for the sake of rebuilding the economy, we have to let development rip. And that will be a feature of both urban and rural life, that almost all planning restrictions will go. And lots of other things of the same kind will happen. Already there's this madness, which I think is particularly paradoxical given this rather goopy, open-minded, open-mouthed response of some people to the shutdown, saying, oh, how nice, we can hear the birds sing. Well, of course you can hear the birds sing because the economy is stopped and economies are noisy. But what is now happening is a huge boost to the private car, because the government has unintentionally made people terrified of using public transport. So all those expensive trains and buses, which we've been spending so much time subsidizing and building for the past 20 or 30 years, no one will go on them. So it's back into the private car with you, whereupon you'll be slapped with congestion charges when you use it, and also much higher petrol prices, because I'm pretty certain that one of the things that will now go is the 10-year freeze on fuel duty, which the government has maintained for fear of what would happen if we lifted it. They will now feel that they have a pretext to start raising fuel duty. So it will be both expensive and noisy and dirty, and there'll be a lot more cars on the road. So that will happen too. And it will be one of the consequences of this. I personally think it's nonsense. I travel by train or bus without any hesitation, but you see people, they're terrified of it in case they pick up the plague. And the unreason of it is extraordinary. The other day I was riding through my hometown, Oxford, along a very, very lovely road in the most expensive and well-educated part of town. It was quite early in the morning. There was no traffic on the roads, and although I'm, as I say, 68, I probably managed to get my bike up to about 15 miles an hour. And you could hear the birds singing. And probably if you were walking along the pavement, you could hear the whir of my chain going round as well, or the impact of my tires on the road. And as I approached a woman, the mother of 2 children, who was walking on the very wide pavement, she looked around, saw me coming on my bicycle at 15 miles an hour, gathered her 2 children into her arms like a mother hen gathering her brood, and hurried them away to the other side of the pavement so as to avoid the terrible danger of me going by on a bicycle at 15 miles an hour. I mean, this is nonsense. And people dressed up as spacemen in ridiculous welders' masks. There was a man in a supermarket near me, observed by reliable witnesses, in a diver's mask and snorkel the other day. People have just gone completely off their trolleys on this and wholly overestimating the danger. And it makes everything so incredibly difficult.
Peter, I understand that you have your own contraption in order to protect yourself. Do you have it to hand? Could we see it?
Well, I can get it in a couple of minutes. If you're prepared to wait.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely prepared to wait, yeah.
Just a moment. Yeah, I got that.
Look at that. I mean, what sort of reaction do you think the mother with her children would have had if you'd been wearing that whilst you were cycling down the road?
She'd probably been reassured. This is the extent of the madness. I mean, obviously, I'm mocking the whole thing by wearing this.
Yes, I thought as much.
The point of it has no other purpose. But the kind of people who gather their children up and apart from anything else, children are at almost no risk from COVID at all. And the number of children who have been affected by it is tiny. But the people who react like that would probably be reassured if I turned up in a sort of Warsaw Pact green gas mask rather than frightened. Much more worried by the sight of someone whizzing past them on a bicycle than by that of a gas mask. That's how crazy we've got.
Well, we can get into the liberty around that in a moment. But the previous point we were discussing about cost and the economic weight, and the counter argument, I think it's one that I actually raised with you last time we spoke, but that essentially in a time of existential crisis and threat, you say to hell with the costs, we have to survive. And
if there were such a threat, but there isn't one.
Well, ONS data shows that there have been 55,000 excess deaths over the course of the pandemic.
That is not out of the ordinary.
It's nearly double the death toll of the Blitz, and there are a significant number of excess deaths, aren't there?
The Blitz is not a flu epidemic. The flu epidemic tends to take that many people, and it tends to take people who are ill. And what you will find if you go back over the past few years is there have been, I think, 2 comparable quite recent flu epidemics, which have had similar levels of death. In fact, larger in one case if you adjust for the growth in population. And certainly, as I say, the 68, 69 Hong Kong flu was much larger, and nobody thought that these were a pretext for the self-harming measures which we've taken on this occasion. You'll have to explain to me why this was so different from those. And in fact, its main difference, and again, all kinds of false accusations are made of anybody who says this, the main difference is that it largely affects people who are both old, in some cases very old, and already suffering from major other conditions which threaten their lives already. It's the danger of this virus to healthy people in their youth or in middle age or to children is very small indeed.
So, I mean, do you not accept then that the most important thing at the moment is, from a public health perspective, to avoid a second spike of the kind that we've already seen? I mean, how can we, in good conscience, do anything that might risk that happening?
What is the evidence for this second spike?
Well, in the sense that...
We keep talking about it, but Professor Pennington, if you read him, he had a very interesting article published, of course, in the Aberdeen Press and Journal, I think it was, recently, in which he said, what is the evidence for this second spike? He's an expert on the matter. He says, people say it's because influenza epidemics sometimes have a second peak, but this isn't influenza. So, and there is, I don't think, any particular reason to believe there will be a second spike. There might be one. But even if there is, the first spike has not been so bad as to justify the measures taken to deal with it. So why would you continue them for a second spike, which is theoretical anyway? There's so much speculation in this. There is no evidence that the shutdown measures have saved a single life, not any.
Yes, it's a moving situation, isn't it?
There isn't any evidence, and yet this immense assault on personal liberty and this catastrophic self-sabotage of the economy have taken place on the basis of a belief which is not substantiated. In fact, what are we playing with here? Science doesn't, in the reason, don't permit you to take actions on the basis of pure speculation, especially actions of such immense power. And this talk of, I have to say it again because it keeps getting neglected, people are going to die. People have almost certainly already died because of these measures. The people who didn't go to their cancer appointments, who weren't screened or who missed operations, they will die. People who are utterly miserable, forced to live alone at home, having had previously happy, busy lives, and who've taken their lives, they have died. A lot of other people have died, I suspect, as well, of other various complaints. And the idea that this is life versus money is absolute drivel. It is life versus life. Lives are lost in both measures, but the loss of life and health, which will result from this catastrophic fall in the economy, is huge. The people think of the economy as being fat guys like the Monopoly man in a top hat with a big bulging stomach and a cigar. The economy is the thing in which we live and move and have our being. The economy pays for the health service. The economy pays for the training of doctors. It pays for the medicines. It pays for the hospitals. And if there isn't an economy, those things go. The economy also pays for things like control of pollution, for clean water and clean air. And for decent housing in which people don't fall ill. These are the really huge alterations in our conditions over the past 100 years have been those things. They're paid for by the economy. You crash the economy, you crash things which sustain life and health.
Yes.
And we will kill people by the way we have crashed the economy, and not just for a few months, but for years to come.
Yes, I remember you were keen to make that distinction last time we spoke, and to also make it clear that you don't have a disregard for life and that you don't hold that callous view.
I have to assume that my opponents, however much I may dislike or disapprove of them, are not motivated by ill will. But I don't get the same favour shown to me. It's been quite noticeable in this argument that people who actually oppose these actions and oppose this policy are treated in some way as callous pariahs and have to spend half their time explaining, actually, no, I'm not a callous pariah. Actually, I have a rational argument to make. Please listen to it.
So on your point then about personal liberty, you touched on this right at the beginning of our conversation. I think I know the answer to the question, but do you think that the acceptance of risk, the mitigation of risk, is a matter for the individual? So I think you used the point of a crowded pub. Are you saying that you'd be in there right now? I know you don't drink much.
I'm repeating what Lord Sumption, the eminent judge and historian, said the other day. He said he would do that. Yes, I would, because first of all, I think that those who are genuinely worried know now that they are at risk and to stay at home. And if they choose, if I were 88 and supposedly at risk of this disease, I wouldn't be particularly bothered about going out. Because as far as I'm concerned, death is something which comes to us all sooner or later, and it's going to come. I can't live a completely crabbed life hiding under the stairs in case something happens to me, because I will die eventually, and it will come, and it could equally well come if I stayed at home. But no, I would go out, whatever age I was, and I would encourage anybody who was seriously worried, stay at home, don't go. But everybody else should be free to act normally.
And I know you don't drink very much, Peter, but perhaps you might have a glass of beer when you're in the pub.
Well, I have what I feel like. That's the thing. The point is, no, this ought to be something which a normal human being is free to do. I can think of no previous government that has restrained the living of life to this extent. It's astonishing what you're not allowed to do. And technically, still, we aren't allowed to leave our houses unless we're doing something approved of by the police. Well, good heavens.
Peter Hitchens, thank you very much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.